All right. So last week we spoke about demand forecasting. Okay, and now I think let's take it to the next step. What actually happens after the company comes up with the demand forecasting based upon how they see their business is going to grow up, or based on different internal and external factors. Okay, so now the companies with the ready with the forecast numbers. Now what is that they will do with the forecast numbers is what we are going to discuss today, and this would be at a very high level. So if you can see today, I think we will be talking about the next stage, which would be more on the supply planning side of it, post demand forecasting, right? So
Yeah,
what happens is like generally, and it varies from company to company, the horizon they try to forecast the demand. So some companies they go for 1 year, some companies they go for 2 years, and some companies they go for 5 years. Now, the demand forecasting is very critical because it helps them to plan for things proactively, because anything they have to do, in terms of investment, adding more capacity, or qualifying new suppliers, or whatever it is that impacts the supply significantly, they have to forecast this for a good period of horizon. So it can vary from company to company. So this is where this sales and operation planning process is very very handy. It's a very important process, and most of the company follow this process post demand forecasting. So what basically sales and operation planning process is, it what it does is basically it takes the demand, and based on the demand and whatever the company, they will map it to their existing capacities, right? Whatever capacities they have, and whether the existing capacity, their existing process, vendors, suppliers, everything, right? And this I'm talking from mostly from the supply chain point of view, right? Now sales and operations planning is very critical for other functional areas like demand management teams, functional, financial, revenue management teams, and others. But speaking about from operations point of view, that what happens is that when we, let's say, when we share a 4 year, a 5 year plan, or a 2 year plan, right? So the companies map it to their existing supply chain or existing capacities, and right, even from how many vendors they have, how many factories they have, what is their overall capacity, and they see the shortcomings, if they have any shortcomings as such, or do they have any extra buffers in capacity and all, and they have to, based on their business objective, they have to take key decisions on how do they want to align their existing capacities or whatever infrastructure they have. Like, let's say, now two scenarios, right? Either if it is a growing business, then it is a need for them, it is very important to understand how much capacity they need to add. Or if, let's say, if they see there's a downturn, what should be they're doing, because we have discussed in the past, like if there's a downturn, how it actually impacts the margins of the company, because there's a fixed cost that is involved, and the companies have to take key decisions. Should they actually trim down their capacities, reduce any operation costs they have? Should they shut down the factories for some times, and all those things? So this S&W process helps them in taking those decisions. And most likely, generally, companies, in order to allow to meet their future financial goals, they have to take key decisions in terms of investment, and if they have to add any additional capacity, they have to qualify new vendors and all those things, right? So basically it's more from sub materials and capacity point of view, right? So this involves, so decision making can involve any investment, any new investment that is needed, any new setup, any new factory they have to set up, or additional capacities they have to buy, and all those things. And these things take a lot of time, right? It's just not about commissioning the capacities, but you need to qualify the products and all those things. And varying from company to company, the lead times can vary, and this is why this process is very very critical. And post demand for forecasting, this is one of the key process that is being followed by most of the companies as such. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, sales and operation planning. Now within operations, and how operations team or supply chain teams uses this supply sales and operation planning, is what I want to take next step, or get one level below, especially from capacity and materials point of view. So once sales and for the supply chain teams, they look at this sales and operation planning process. And as I was talking about, the two key things they get into is, how much capacity they have to plan for and how much material they have to plan for. Now, coming back to the capacity planning, basically when I say capacity planning, we are talking about the additional machines or additional tools or lines that is required to meet the future demand, which, let's say, if it is a growing business, so, and for a growing business, they have to install new capacities. And how do they actually uh, come out with the what exactly is they needed is they go for this rough cut capacity planning. Now, rough cut capacity planning is nothing but it's more like a scenario analysis, or it's an analysis of their capacity requirement to meet the demand. So what they do is, it's basically to meet the demand, whatever they have or whatever they are predicting, what is that additional capacity they need, right? That's what rough cut capacity planning is. And as you can see, right, so based on this, if they need like a 2x or 3x in increase in capacities, right, based on their existing capacities which they map to, they have to come up and see whether they have to add additional capacities for specific products, or across the companies they have to, let's say, they have to come up with a new factory and all those things. That is a key decision that happens after a S&OP process, right? So if the demand is significantly going up, that is one thing. And from materials point of view also, right, if they see that whatever existing suppliers vendors they have, whether are they do their internal capacity are sufficient enough to meet the future companies demand or not, is what also the executives look into. And this forecast is also shared with our external vendors to see whether they have sufficient capacities or not, or else we also work with them closely to see if they can ramp up their capacities or not, or if there is a need to qualify additional vendors, so that we can also make use of their capacities and in the future allocate some loading or some demand to them as well. So this again at a high level, companies make use of this demand forecasting numbers, wherein they align with they map it with their existing capacities and come up with all this planning and all this key decision making that happens. And as I said, this horizon can vary from 2 year to 4 year or 5 year period. Now, the key thing here is it's not a very straightforward decision, because it's they have to because again it's a forecast. We really don't know what is going to happen next month, right? So it's a very tricky situation in the sense that the companies have to make a fine balance. They have to take a they have to take a call, what is the customer service or what is the service level they want to cater to, right? So some companies, they want to have a customer service or service levels up to 95 percentage. And service levels, as we have discussed in the past, is basically what is that out of 100 times, how what percentage of the times they want to meet the customer's demand on time. That's basically the service levels are. So they have to, or whatever the market standards are, right, for the service levels. So they have to take a
Let me ask,
basically a
what is it normally like in semiconductor industry? Do you know what it is?
it's pretty much the same actually. Service levels, when we say how what most of the times what is the percentage, and I've seen
No,
generally
no,
that
and the number itself, the percentage,
oh, you're
is it?
talking about the number itself. I'll tell you what. Semiconductors, they look for their bottlenecks, and the key bottlenecks, what I've understood in semiconductor, is the wafer, right? Now, as long as and wafer, when I say, because from cost point of view, wafer is the biggest expensive component, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you don't have any wafer constraints, ideally, we target for 100% service levels. But in a realistic numbers, if you really ask me, generally it varies from 95 to 98 percentage. That's what they look for. And this I'm talking when there is no wafer constraint as such, because that's our key component. Now, if there is a wafer constraint, when we say that, okay, like our demand is good enough, and in the overall market we know that based on our capacities, this is what we are going to get the wafer from, then it actually gets reduced from 95 to 90 percentage. But if there is no constraint, as I said, then yeah, the target would be to meet as much as possible, because for us the key thing is, for us to make any component, the wafer is a major one, which basically can vary from 60 to 70 percentage. So the companies don't care about the other components, which are low value components, which we call it as. And generally they are okay to carry more inventory buffers, especially from low value components point of view, to meet as much as demand possible on time. So that's how the strategy varies,
Okay,
and that's
got it.
how
Yeah,
our KPIs are measured, depending upon what kind of constraint scenario is. And it's a good point that you made last time also, like when we are in a constraint situation, we go for this allocation based planning. So that's what it happens. And the service levels also do vary based on the market situation. So
got it.
coming back to my point here, so they have to have this a very fine balance between what is the service levels they want to meet, and how much they want to invest into their capacities and qualifying new vendors and all those things, because everything has cost, and whatever extra cost they are putting in, and additional investment they are doing it, it has to tie up with their future revenues, right? And
Yeah,
it's a very calculated decision which actually goes in a staggered way. And
yeah.
it's like and it's very critical also, like if when we know that especially in technical based companies, like semiconductor and all, we know that the lead times are very high to qualify a new factory, to qualify a new machine, to set up a new factory and all. It's these are very
How
from
long
lead
does
time
it
point of
take? What is the qualification timeline to get a vendor?
qualification vendor, if you see internally, let's say for a new product and all, it can vary from 3 to 6 months, right? That's a
Okay,
qualification time. Now what happens, it also has to go through a rigorous what is this rigorous checklist, because not just the cost factor that is involved as such, but the strategic location, and the kind of agreement you have with those vendors, because you're sharing your technology also, right? So it's a very complicated process as such. So yeah,
okay,
roughly
that
I believe
makes
it
sense.
goes to three, yeah, it goes to three
Three
to
to six
six
months.
months
Okay.
Yeah,
I
three
just
to
want to
six months
add, I think what Satya is talking when he's saying calculated decision. So a decision whether you want to invest in additional capital to bring a new factory or a portion of factory, or you want to actually go with a vendor and then incrementally scale into them. And after you hit a critical point, let's say whatever 30%, like is when you say, hey, if I invest new capex based on the current demand I have, maybe I will hit a internal rate of return of 15%, 20%, whatever that number is. And then based on that, the decision is made. But the decision is not made by supply chain. This supply chain, we are trying to inform and provide all the factors
exactly.
needed. Essentially the P&L owner or the business owner is going to make the decision. Something to keep that in mind. On that note, I just want to ask you, like, normally, like in semiconductor industry, I'm broadly industry, but I'm asking, what is the internal rate of return hurdle, do you know, like when they're trying to invest new capital equipment?
See, in semiconductors, right, the gross margins can vary as such. Now
Gross
uh,
margin is okay, but I'm talking
but
this. Let's say you put in like $100 you're spending to open a plant. Um, you are trying to get, let's say, 15%. Like you want to get $100 back. It takes about 7 years or 5 years. Let's say that's more like 15%.
Oh, that's a very interesting question as such. And as I said, it depends on many factors. Like especially, it depends on what percentage of how basically your company is being funded, right? So
Yeah.
if you, let's say, if the major share is with the respective owner, right? So it depends on the mindset of the owner as such. But if you have too many institutional investors, the pressure is always get the buck as soon as possible. So generally, I have seen at least, and as I said, this is not a fixed number. It can vary from from company to company. But generally, what they see is like 5 year period is what the baseline is, and whatever additional capex or whatever they're investing, they would love to have that back in at least 5 years, because that's a
So it's
baseline
like,
they keep.
yeah. So that's roughly like a 15% internal rate of return kind of
Exactly,
thing.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
think that's
right, correct.
ballpark the same number I've seen like generally in
Yes.
CPG industry as well.
Hmm.
But
And
just one
right,
thing
right.
I want to highlight here, I'm just trying to connect the dots from supply chain back to the business sector and all that. Normally, 15% is a pretty good return, like especially in the last 5 6 years when the interest rates were quite low, at least in the US and all that. But if you compare this to some tech sectors like Amazon and some of these guys, I mean the IRRs are north of like 30 40%. Okay, that is one of the reasons why they are like big cash generating machines, because of the business model and whatever other reasons. They have tremendous like amount of this rate of return, and that makes a difference. But again, I think Satya mentioned a lot about the technology going out of date as well. So when you're putting this 15% on paper is one thing, but truly are
No,
we
that
going to get it in 5 years is a big thing. So
it's a
that's where
big
we
thing.
they take a
Yeah.
staggered approach of getting a vendor, get up to like 20-30% of volume on the vendor, see how things are going. Once you feel confident about that demand, then you incrementally go and get your like approval to do this new factory build. That's what I have seen. I'm guessing the same for
Yes,
semiconductor.
yes, and also the nature of the business plays a very key role over here because, like as we discussed also in the past, right? If something which is stable, which has been there for decades or 100 years, so from a technology point of view, right? The transition from one product to another product, it takes time. But especially in a semiconductor-based company, the transition happens very fast, right? So. So the investment here is just not like not only to meet the future revenue as such, but what happens is that when you stop taking these key decisions, or if you don't take these key decisions on time, is that it can make or break the company. Because what happens is that the market share cap, right? You can lose the market cap in a very short period of time, and it can happen based on specific products. Let's say if you don't launch a new product, or if some other company has a launch a new product and you're falling in back, that can make a very big dent in our market cap. And if these decisions are not taken on time, and if you're not able to meet your customer expectations, right, it can happen, things can happen very fast, that entire market cap can of yours can be taken away by the other company. So apart from rate of interest, returns on your investment, the other thing also, like especially the technical company, the technology based companies, they have to make sure that they
They
have
have
all
to
these
play
crucial.
defense.
Exactly,
Yeah,
they have to be very very proactive, frankly speaking,
exactly.
because the technology transition happens
Yeah. On this
very
side, I
fast.
mean, I think I just want to highlight on the consumer packaged goods companies. Normally, the food thing doesn't change, but if you think about it, unlike semiconductor, the categories in food are really enormous. We all actually like to have different kind of foods, and then the
Hmm.
category sizes are small. Like I'm saying, like let's say you're getting a storage thing in semiconductor, by itself that could be like a gigantic category. But in food, that doesn't happen that badly. They usually the smaller in size, and you have many categories to really deal with. So the transition doesn't happen completely on the food, but it happens more so on the consumer preferences. For example, in the US, like in 2009 and 10, there used to be a big lot of yogurts, like curd in US was flavored yogurts were quite popular those days. Okay, light yogurt, flavored yogurt, and French style yogurt they used to market, and that completely went out of trend. And like in 2-3 years, Greek yogurt became like a big phenomena, and that capacities will completely go to waste, and the market share was lost. It was like a huge thing. So certain categories things happen really fast, even in the food area. Certain categories have been sticky and they're continuing. So when you're making the investment, you're really thinking hard. Hey, am I going to get the return? What's going to happen? What's not going to happen? Kind of thing. Let me give another like simple example. Okay, there was a this I'm just going on the top of my mind. Take it with a grain of salt. So there's like this trend happening in the pizza category, like frozen pizzas. I don't know how far frozen pizzas is a big deal in India. So you have like a base of the pizza and you have the vegetables or like meats and everything, and it's frozen and it's in the fridge. You pick that up in the grocery store, you get it in your oven and you heat it up, and then you have your pizza ready. Is that common in India? You have those kind of frozen pizzas in a grocery store? No,
Frozen pizza, I see the bases are being sold actually. At least I can
not
see the
just the
base.
base. It's like the
No,
whole pizza is there.
the whole thing I'm yet to see as a
Yeah, to say
frankly
okay.
speaking.
It's,
Yeah, I'm
this
yet
is
to
a
see.
huge category, like in US. Okay, and a lot of these pizzas don't have extremely good ingredients. They so the cheese itself is not made from milk. So there's a big trend moving towards better for you pizza. Isn't like they have better ingredients in that. Okay, but the challenge what happens is these pizza, the better for you ingredients, gross margins are smaller. So you don't want to use lose your profit pie to that one. So there is a hesitance on the company to invest. But like what Satya was saying, the same way the technology is eating into your share, if you're not proactive, this category consumer trend is going to kill you and you're going to lose share really fast. So
Yes,
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 I
yes.
diverged a little bit, but I thought it's an important real time sort of an example I wanted to provide how the investment decisions actually happen and how supply chain comes into play, because you're providing the cost inputs, trade offs to the business to really make a call on things. And there's a lot of sensitivity with respect to cost, especially if you're like getting some input from like a vendor and what's happening. the vendor what they provide with respect to volumes they can make, the cost they provide. Especially if you're going to something new categories, there is not too many of external supply chain partners who do things. So it gets very tricky. So having good conversations with your business partners while actually providing range of things is quite useful. I think Satya, I'll let you go to the next step. Do you have one more slide? No.
So yeah, I think that's all for today. In the sense, like we wanted to bring in these two things uh,
Yeah.
from
I don't know.
additional.
You did you actually put something on your right cheek?
Y-
I see like a
Yes,
white
yes.
mark. What is
Yeah,
that?
there's a blister on my cheek. I think probably due to
Okay, okay.
change in weather. So we are transitioning from winter to summer.
Okay,
So I can see some side effects of it on my
okay,
body.
okay.
So yeah.
Got it, got it.
So
All right.
I've applied on pint. But yeah, coming back to the pizza thing, it still reminds me when I when I went to US for masters, I saw this frozen parathas, frozen
Yeah.
curries, and all, and that was a new thing for me back back in, like, because
But
I've
is
not
that a
seen.
common thing now in the US,
Now
in
it's
India?
I can see those things in India.
But
So
it
and
was not common, right? Those days.
yes, back then I've not never saw such things in India, and I was delighted. Like I was like, it's a like ready to made thing for me. I can
Correct.
just take it and just heat it in the oven. So, and those things have started coming up in India. People, especially the couples who are working and they're busy, they don't have time, and also it's an easy thing. Like the things are shaping, changing back in India. So all those habits are also right.
I mean,
It's
it's
moving.
almost clear. I think it's happening only faster. I always felt this. Whatever
Yes,
happens in the US, it will happen in India just with a lag of 20 years. And take it with a pinch of salt. Nowadays, the lag may be 20 months or 2 months, depending
it's
on whether
happening
you're
fast.
talking about
Mhm.
technology or a consumer trend or a behavior pattern. But that's how it is.
No,
So,
it's happening. Yeah, I agree with it. It's happening at a very faster rate, and especially when you reach that threshold, it jumps up even faster actually. So I think that's where India is. So yeah, so again, right? So it's just not about getting trying to increase your market share, or or also have better returns on your investment, but it's a very critical decision for a company, which is like it can make or break the company, as well as you don't want to change the behavior of the customers, and if they're specifically getting something from a specific company, and if you're losing out on that pie, because that can pretty much change the behavior of the customer demand ordering, and you can suddenly, you might not realize how that small thing, though you might not make profit, or it can be a loss in that specific segment, but that can change the perception of the customers towards the company or the behavior, and
yeah. And
and
sometimes you
slowly.
have to take like a long-term bet, even though the money is not
Exactly,
made. Yeah.
exactly.
One
It's
thing I want to
it's not.
highlight is just go ahead, go ahead.
I want to give us very simple analogy, right? Like
Yeah.
and I've seen this in my, like, my family owns a business, right? So we have this departmental store. So when a customer comes, right? So it's not that we will have all the products, right?
Right.
But what we make sure is that if a customer comes, he needs 5 items, and let's say in our store we have only 4 items. We never allow that customer to go to another store to get that fifth item. Okay, it's not a
Hmm.
big deal, fifth item.
Yeah.
But if you look from other point, if the customer goes there, he gets a fifth item. Now the customer will think that why should I go to two different stores
Right.
for all these, for these
Right.
5 items, instead of why don't I try in the second store where I got my fifth item? Why don't I try the first 4 items as well, right? So this is how the customer behavior can change, and these are the things a good company, a company with you know they can actually predict. They have to predict such scenarios, they have to predict such behavior. It cannot be like a one-to-one thing, right? So they have to be
Right.
looking into different angles to make sure that customer behavior don't change, that they don't expose themselves, where they started playing into someone else's hand. So this is how
Yeah.
the company should be very, very smart enough to, when they take all these decisions. And supply chain operations planning team, as you mentioned, when they go into this S&OP process, they give their input to the top management or upper management. Hey, hey, look at, guys, this is the investment we have to make for us to make sure that not just meeting the growth in demand, as well as and also the products, different products that we are trying to bring into the market. We are making sure that we are in a situation that we can meet all these things. So all those things, the input is given, and it's up to the management, based on their situation, how they can get all those things, or whatever their corporate strategies, they take the key calls.
Yeah, makes sense. I think within the supply chain functions itself, Satya covered processes around demand planning and supply planning. I would say these are the two biggest functions which are closest to the business. Understanding the business, how to think from their context and providing the inputs in a reasonable fashion is extremely important. You can have a slightly siloed approach of saving costs, working in warehousing, transportation, and other places, but I think supply planning and demand planning are the closest with respect to catering to the business needs, and having the business context, working with some of your colleagues who understand the business quite well is very important. This is one areas I felt like supply chain experience itself is not sufficient. Having that specific industry experience, whether it's semiconductor, consumer packaged goods, might take 1 to 3 years, is very important to really provide the answer in an educated fashion. I have seen myself caught many times where I've made suggestions which are not holistic in
I
nature
think
because
Uday was breaking.
I did.
Mm.
Sorry, I think I'm still here. I'm saying not having the business knowledge on how the products, who is a customer, can be a little bit of handicap for you to be in a acting in an educated partner to the business teams when they are making these kind of big decisions.
No, yes,
I
yes,
want to
that is
throw
key
like
challenge, right?
a
No matter.
one example for Satya. He talked about like a retail store in US. Like if you go to any grocery store, you'll typically find like your milk all the way at the end in the perimeter. The idea is because those are like your milk run is like you need those bread and butter items. When you go for them, you'll go walk through the store and you look at all the other items. That's a basic way of thinking about it. And also these guys, even retail stores, and for that matter, even some of the consumer packaged goods, when they look at category insights, they always think about these basic items, bread and butter items, because if you don't have them, the consumer will not make a run to the store, right? So like a grocery run. um, so they so they essentially make sure they always have those items, never go out of stock, actually give a competitive price. So in this, I'll tell you fun fact. Costco, if you go to Costco has this like really nice oven baked rotisserie chicken, and they actually sell it for a really low dollar price item. And the whole point and tactic is people will come back for rotisserie chicken. That is what is your, I forgot the exact word they call, like that's like the thing which will drive you to the store, and then you buy other things. So they'll have these anchor items like milk and certain things, and they keep them at a price point, and then they drive you to the store. Same thing happens with the gas station as well in US, like a regular like a petrol bunk, the petrol price is kept equal or lower, and you come into the store and you buy other things.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about whoever has who actually thought started thinking in that direction. I like hats off to that person, like who was able to peep into the human behavior or customer psychology, that the placement of the products
Yeah,
would play such a big a great factor driving up the demand, which I would say is bit more artificial. And someone who was able to look through into this and play around with, which I call it as analytics or supply chain analytics
yeah.
or the placement analytics, like
So I think
story.
on that, Satya, people who don't work in the consumer packaged or a retail industry don't know this, and it probably feels a little bit like a surprise. But I'm telling you, these are very developed areas and very sophisticated, and there are separate teams. Okay, in consumer
I
packaged goods itself, there is a consumer insights teams, there is a category insights teams, okay, and there is a store insights team. And I worked on like category insights quite extensively. So you go to a store, you have an aisle of cereal. They think, okay, what kind of cereal boxes I want to put at eye level, what kind I want to put on the bottom floor, what I want to put the top. They always put the kids cereal at the bottom level because kids walk and they can only see this that level. Eye level they want to have top cereal. Then there are a lot of numbers they run and they do. So let's say US Target or Walmart shows a 4,000 stores, they do test versus control stores. They put it for 200 stores, see how the sales were, and they try another 400. This happens quite extensively, across the board. They'll think
Yes,
about
yes, yes.
where do we put
No,
the, and then they
there
also
was.
actually have some some things like how do we track like a consumer sort of a shop pattern or a shopping basket, and a lot of analysis happens. It just sounds like so weird that hey, we don't know, like they are thinking about our psychology indirectly, but I mean, these are fairly developed fields, and there's a lot of work which happens here, and they try to track and look at you very closely.
No, that's yeah, that's what, like when I first learned about this like 5 6 years back, like one of the I was trying to browse through this about this analytics piece of it, and that actually was very fascinating to learn to like how companies are these days making, and this is what we call it as data analytics, right? They actually peg back to everything to their revenue, how the revenue of that specific
Yeah.
items has
Oh,
changed when they change the location of the item, and it can be within the racks also, like that can make a
yes.
hell lot of
Mhm.
difference, and not just like putting it way back in the store, or putting it from immediately as soon as you enter the store, and not just within that but within the racks, how does it play, and they all they do this all
Yeah.
this analytics around it. It's like
Easier thing
amazing.
is like your website, think about store as a physical version of
Exactly.
your website, like Amazon
Right.
store. If they place something on the front page was the second page, how do
Exactly.
you
Yes.
click? How
Yes.
is the
Yes.
conversion and all? These are probably more easier to understand, but same
Yes. Yes.
same type of activity happens in a physical space too.
That's like, right, Google. That's how. Like, if you have to pay to Google, you have to like, okay, in
Yeah.
my in a search, I have to be on
Exactly.
top
So
page.
the
So
how do you want to be
that's
there?
how
Like that's why
that's
I
how it
think when you go
happens.
to a retail store, like they have it in front of like the whole open space in the action alley. They know, okay, I'll get a lot of hits here, so I'm going to have a lot of visibility, and then I have a lot of sales. And they do a lot of analysis, and I did a lot of projects where we were looking at, hey, which category performs best? What is the item I want to put here to get the maximum sales? But anyways, that's a topic for some other day for a
Yes,
discussion,
yes.
which
So
will
I
be.
think, yeah. So on those lines, I think like when we were talking about placement of the goods in a store, I think on a similar analogy next week, I think we will talk about about your placement of your inventory. When I say placement of your inventory, how do you basically stage your inventory, right? At what levels, how companies are smart enough to stage these inventories, trying to make sure that it is a fine balance between your holding cost, which again we'll talk about what exactly is a holding
Right.
cost, and also trying to meet the demand on time. I think let's talk about the topic next week, so
Next
that
week, okay.
now we know that, okay, we spoke about sales and operation planning process, like you have these capacities and materials. The next step is, now how will you, now you have how you have created this setup for your raw materials and everything. Now how would you convert, what would be your thought process in converting these raw materials to a finished good? Because compared to a raw material, finished good is more expensive to the company, because
More working
you have
capital
done
locked
some
in.
value addition now. And as and when it goes to the SKU level, the cost of the price goes up. So we, next session, what we will discuss is how the company stays these materials. When I say materials, the WIP in progress, which we call it as WIP, how they stage the WIP at different levels, so that they are not piling up too much of inventory, or they're not sitting upon too much of inventory, and waiting for the customer to pick it up, right? So we'll discuss on this next week. I think it's on the similar lines of what we
Yeah,
discussed about how today in stores the products are stored. So yeah.
makes sense. I think we can just talk one other topic for the day and then see if we can wrap. So, just slightly divergent topic. Satya took the section to do all the concept work. We can talk a little bit about the COVID effect on the supply chains and some of the, I would say, more fancy, probably supply chain models in the last 20, 30, 40 years, how they will change and all that. I'll just take a stab at it, Satya. You can add after that. So, if you
Sure, sure.
think broadly in the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's been a huge globalization effect happening across the board, right? So, a lot of, especially in US, if you see, a lot of industries even moved completely overseas, like to China or Southeast Asia, other places. So, some factories vanished completely. If you take something like shoes and apparel, I cannot think of any place doing anything in the US. Okay, but also with this whole like it's quite often that in business certain concepts get like catch fire and they are taken to the extreme level. So just in time manufacturing, just in time inventory, and like a pull based supply chain has become a huge fashionable thing because you can keep your supply chains lean, everything was good. So that's where all the companies were moving towards, and overlay on the top of that some of these effects of moving to like a um, other country sort of a vendor. It came to a point where the supply chain resiliency is at risk, and then all came to bear when the COVID hit. That's when companies realized, man, like we are in a really deep situation. If something were to happen, I don't think we're in a good spot because we have just in time inventory, and then we have these external vendors, some other country. So there's no way for us to absorb these kind of a variability in demand and risks which are happening. I believe in the next 10-15 years we are going to see like a huge move away, and the pendulum we swung too far to the middle somewhere with respect to this just in time. We are probably going to stock more inventory. We're going to have like duplicate vendors, and we'll think a lot more about this and plan for the risk. And then this will bring a lot of inefficiency to supply chain from a cost point of view. But as a business, probably that could be the ideal decision to be made. uh, but I just want to highlight how things happen. It's not like supply chain in isolation is making the call, hey, this is how the inventory I'm putting. It's all about what is needed to cater to the business and the risk reward the business is willing to take. Our job is to service to that and show the options, and the business leader makes a call on some of these things.
No, I think that that call, that that balancing between the cost to the company and how do you want to cater to your customer needs, right? That question will always be there. Like, I understand the situation would have changed and the situation will always change. Now, COVID time, if you really ask anyone, right, they would have preferred everything to have been outsourcing everything to a third party vendor, whoever it is, or their external vendors or something. Let them own. So there's something called vendor managed inventory and all those things, right?
Yeah,
So the companies, especially during COVID times, they would have thought that, how these things would have made a lot of difference to them, because they are not taking the responsibility for all the additional costs they have to have, especially from inventory point of view, or setting up on huge pile of inventory. Let's say the demand variation has happened significantly. Now they're suddenly setting a huge pile of inventory. Now having this is the situation, like, what I call it as a, capex or non-capex. Capex is basically something the companies own it, the factories or everything, right?
right, right.
Non-capex is basically your third party suppliers, right? Subcontractors. You contract them everything, and it is, so you give them the forecast, they build it, and you have an agreement saying that, hey, you have the inventory store for me, but you will charge me only when I pick up that inventory, right? So now I understand in such scenarios your cost slightly might be high compared to cost per component, or cost per that unit might be high, especially compared to what you can produce it in house. But this is the additional additional advantage, this kind of supply chain gives you, where when you have contract subcontract everything to them, right from not from raw materials or capacity point of view, but even building up that inventory to the final SKU. So you can leverage it, especially during this kind of situation, like especially when there's a downturn, right? So you will be only charged only when you pick up that inventory. So when you have
Yeah,
sufficient demand, it's okay, it's like a win-win situation. But even let's say downturn, it's a win situation mostly for the companies, because they are going to be costed, or they are going to be charged only when you pick up the inventory. And this is the risk the vendors they take, because again, right, for them it is important to them keep running their capacities and all, but if they are also piling up on so much of inventory, they lose cash. But for the company it's a beneficial situation. And again, everything has its own pros and cons. If it's a good business, continuous demand and all those things, and if you start looking from margins point of view, if it is in internal or capex, then you are making more profit or more margins. But if you have contracted, your margins will slightly go down, but that again can help you out, especially during the downturn situation, where again your liability as a company is less for the inventory compared to the what the subcontractor has to have it. So
I think
yeah,
this
so
is
they
Satya is talking about manufacturing coming from the other
exactly.
part. But at the same time, if you don't have like these partners closer to you by location and all, I think once the demand came back, I think in India situation was different. COVID came and then demand slowly recovered. But I think in US it was completely different. It was a true V-shaped recovery. The demand was gone only for 2.5 months. After that, massive amount of stimulus, massive amount of interest rate reduction. It was a boom, like a huge demand came back. So this is where I think some of the just-in-time supply chains, it became really tough for them to build inventories and cater to the demand. So the other side of that trade-off came into sort of play. Just to add to what Satya was telling, just one thing I want to call out is, at least this is personally my opinion. I know Satya talked about, hey, you can have better margin if VMI or some other guy will do. I mean, those are in my mind like all the tactics you have to play depending on as a company what is the power you have and situation and the number of vendors and the leverage and all those things is all good. But I mean, as a supply chain professional, I mean, we'll do what is needed for the business. But I'm not like completely like a I would say full fan of some of these tactics to say that I really improved anything. See, the real improvement for the company, for the society, for the country comes if you bring in any efficiency. Okay, this would be like, let's say you had a network of transportation lanes, you had warehouses, you figured out a way of actually doing keeping just two warehouses and having lesser number of lanes and still moving the product. See, that is a true efficiency and the value of a supply chain guy. I mean, you we can do some of these tactics on like moving and all those. Those are essentially playing power play tactics and less of supply chain efficiency, adding to the overall ecosystem. I just want to highlight people to think about it, and it is important depending on like what your company is doing, what their position are, and we will go ahead and try to work with our partners and do the optimal thing for the current company. But as a supply chain person, uh, thinking agnostically about the company or anything, the ecosystem has to become efficient is my goal. In that situation, thinking about the true projects and true things which add efficiency is something to keep in mind. Our latest greatest is ESG movement, environmental, social, and governance, and all these things you hear. But some of the things which happen in the supply chain side are extremely weird. I gave the example like you get coconut from Thailand, you ship it to Brazil, they do some processing, then you ship it back to US, and then you put it in your product, and then you make it. I mean, such a convoluted thing. I don't know how you can have an environmentally friendly product if it is moving so many continents, right?
Oh yes,
So
yes,
I think in the future, I'm already seeing it in some of the companies with this ESG becoming like the front end center. We're going to think about our supply chains and how things are happening from a global sense instead of thinking about just my company's profit. We're going to think overall, is it actually really good for the overall ecosystem, environment, and all? But that's a topic for some other time. With that, do you have anything else, Satya, you want to talk in this episode, or you want to wrap up
no, I
and
think, yeah,
pick
I
up
think we
something
can pretty
next week?
much we can wrap up for today actually. So
Yeah.
we can, as discussed, we can bring up other topics like supply planning is a huge. It's like an ocean. We can talk about key concepts or terminologies, what actually, so that even people understand what is this terminologies. They can actually refer into the shop floor or even in supply chain companies. So I think those are the things we can talk into our next session. So we can speak on our next session. All right.
I think as you're talking, your son is slowly sneaking into the
They're
room.
trying to they're trying to make sure that I don't get disturbed.
I'm impressed. He just ducked down under the door and he's coming back in. So cute. Okay, sounds good, Satya. I think good talking to
All
you.
right, man.
We'll catch up
Same
in
here.
the next episode.